Well, I thought I was from Russia, where I grew up. However, I'm an American, and I can't explain this to you very simple. So I made a whole post about it, and guys, this story is insane, and it's all because my mother was up to something very, very bad. What I'm about to tell you is not easy. First, I'll ask you the question, what would happen if you found out that your life is a lie? Some people get excited, thinking that some owl will deliver a letter to them that'll enter a school of magic and wizardry, and that they're a wizard. Others would get discouraged because it means getting out of the matrix and started living of your own life. Well, I'm in the second group. I took the red pill, I saw reality, and now the closest people I have, the ones I've loved all my life, seem to be some kind of twisted villains. I'll explain the subject, but first I must tell you a little about my life. I'll reserve my name and the names of those involved in this story for obvious reasons. I'll only refer to myself as Bob. I'm a 19-year-old and I've lived in Russia all my life. I have a typical Russian upbringing, with the only relevance being that my mother and grandmother, the only two relatives I live with, taught me English as a second language under the motto that it's the most important language in the world, so I had to handle it perfectly according to them. That's why I was doing well in the language classes, and that's why I can write this today. I like to write in English to exercise my brain and keep my knowledge sharp. Anyways, the only curious thing about my family is that I have not heard from anybody else in my family tree, with the only fact being that some of my grandparents came to live in the US of A a few years back, even before I was born, so I have gringo family. I didn't know how to feel about that, and I even got teased by my classmates in elementary school that I was, blood, when in fact my family had spent generations in Russia, or at least that's what I've always thought. Eventually, as I grew older, I came to ask about my father and his whereabouts, but my mother would tell me that he had abandoned us when I was a baby. It was a bit rough to explain to a 5-year-old who would have these sleepless, endless nights crying and saying he didn't have a dad. She would not even give me his first name, last name, address, or any information about him. All she would tell me was that I looked a little like him as a teenager, but only that. That was as far as my knowledge of my father would go. But it wasn't until a few days ago that I learned something rather curious. You see, we've been going through some pretty tough economic times between my grandmother's medication and my college preparations, and we're losing quite a bit of money, and the biggest source of my income is my mom. So, if her sales decrease, it'll decrease our quality of life, and I had to pause going to college so that I could work a little to save enough to pay for my studies. It was a rough season, but it would not compare to not being able to study and staying static for the rest of my life. Anyways, this money thing started to be a problem to the point where I would find my mother crying on the edge of the bed on more than one occasion at night. But when I would try to console her, she would get defensive and say that she did not want to see my face for anything in the world. I came to think that because of my seeming to dad, she might have activated a trigger in her subconscious that would make her automatically hate me. Well, that's a pretty horrible thing to say about your mother, but it's more horrible to be in the sun of the situation, where you're rejected just for being alive. Anyways, back to the story. This, I'll tell you, is 100% real, and it made me start to research more about my origins. And I had tried pages, secretly so that neither my mom nor my grandmother would know, of course. Pages where you could find lost relatives, but nothing. I had no photo, no reference, or even a name to try to find my father. I decided to look this up because, being of legal age, my mother used to ask me to help her with some bank accounts, transfers, and things like that. But one day I came to notice some things in her account balance. Some deposits had been made to her from international accounts, and when I looked at the history, out of curiosity of course, I noticed how the payments were made at least once a month. Well, for a very long time. And when I say a long time, is too long ago, to the point where the history stopped showing the account movement. I found this very strange, and As I went on with this new investigation, I found that among the payment details, there was the word Jonathan among it, something that made me curious. I was tempted to ask my mother about it, but then she would know that I'd gone into her account details without permission, of course. I quickly jotted down the account number and decided to do almost a crime novel job. I found that the digits corresponded to a rather famous American bank. But beyond that, nothing. How does Mom have anything to do with American services? The most American thing we have in this house is peanut butter. Anyways, I started bringing up more conversations with my mom about her American family. She was also very avoidant, saying that it was a side of the family that she had not known for a long time. Even Grandma didn't remember. But when I asked her, it changed. Grandma, separately, would tell me that she did not like to remember her American family as they were very confrontational. Of course, then she started talking about lifestyles radically opposed to her, so it wasn't even worth asking her about it. That got me thinking, all at once, about something fundamental. My father. I started bringing up the subject with my mom more than before in the most and least subtle ways in the world. From mentioning some dad character from a movie or something, something that I'd seen at the time, to start to ask her about him and the sense of whether I should watch out for some disease in the future. She would dodge me, but there came a point where she, tired of so many questions, revealed a huge clue. His name. She told me my father's name was Joel, a far cry from Jonathan I had gotten, so I was at zero. I would have tried the social media thing, but per se, my mom doesn't have social media. My grandmother only uses it to look at recipes. Just look at them, not even make them. And I didn't know where else to find out. I put the subject aside for a while. All of this happened a little less than a year ago, but something happened that not only made me resume my little search, but also revealed great truth about my family. I put on record that I'm not proud of what happened, as I fully understand it's a violation of another person's privacy. Still, in the same way that happened with the bank issues, my mom asked me for help with her direct messaging app, which was overflowing because of the large number of messages that she was accumulating. She left her phone with me so I could, quote, keep an eye on it, and just as I was about to delete her oldest messages, I noticed some curious ones. Good thing she left the room the moment, because otherwise she would have caught me red-handed, opening conversations with an unknown number, whom I gather she blocked some time ago. The messages were conspicuous because they were all in capital letters and with lots of exclamation points, but it was the content of the messages that disturbed me because it had to do with me. And I quote, "Let me talk to him." And I quote, "Show me a picture, at least." And the final quote, "You told me last year that you would talk to him, and so far nothing. He's old enough. He's old enough to know everything and decide what he wants, but that's going to change, and I hope you know how to solve it on your own from now on." When I saw the date of the last message a few months ago, I knew that it coincidentally dated from when we started to have our economic problems, and it was then that everything fit like a puzzle piece. That money belonged to that person, and while I thought of some secret life my mother might or could have had, I went for the best option of all. It was my father. He hadn't died, he hadn't disappeared, he had not abandoned us, and that's why everything is raw. Because from what I could understand from the conversation, he did want to see me, but for some reason my mom would not allow it. Now I understand why she was so elusive every time I asked her about Dad. Of course, it was simply not to reveal the truth. Of course, this revelation generated many, many more questions, and I wrote down the number and saw it was an American number from the US of A. So I wanted to investigate further. Of course, I was not going to reach out to the person and say, "Hi, this is your son whom you have not seen in many years. Let's be friends." No. For a time, as rebellious teenager, I even came to hate my father figure for never being around and leaving us all to ourselves. When in reality, it was my mother that she did not want me to meet him. Why? I don't know. But a friend recommended this page where people usually tell their anecdotes, And I've read some that are quite curious, so I decided to jump in with what I'm going through. I'll be unraveling this story as it develops to you guys, and my next update will be when I finally talk to my father. Something that makes me very nervous. I don't want this to be like in the movies, with tears and hugs and such. Besides, that man seems to be on the other side of the world. A reunion without my mother finding out does not seem very plausible. Update number 1. Let me tell you a story. The story of a woman who would give anything to get ahead, even if it meant extorting a man in one of the vilest ways in history, with her son. My reality changed in a way that I don't think I can prove to you 100%, but I'll make my attempt, starting from the beginning, and then I'll tell you how I found out everything. Years ago, about 20 or 21 years ago, two people met, man and woman. A man with money and a woman with a plan. They met, hit it off, started dating. The man, young and full of lots of work for his family business, was quite a respected figure in the local business scene, and from what I understand, that led to some uncomfortable situations with the people around him. Let's see. Apparently, when you're a person with enough money, you have the power to, quote, do basically whatever you want. But that has to be done carefully because people can take advantage of it, as it was in my father's case. He could have basically had any woman he wanted, but he decided to be with my mother because he found her interesting, and in the first instance, even a perfect candidate to be, quote, the one. Only this woman had the major flaw of being herself. In a short time, the man realized that the woman was more in it for the sake of the money than of a true feeling of affection. It was then that he decided to leave her, but he would do so at a future time. However, something happened, and that's the barrier of protection did not serve well at all because, well, the woman had made a small hole in the condom in order to get pregnant. It feels horrible for me to describe my birth that way as a premeditated accident, but the story gets much, much worse, guys. These two characters, right? They lived in and are from the United States. While I thought all my life that my mother, my grandmother, and the rest of my family were from Russia, it turns out that I'm more American than apple pie. This whole story takes place in the United States, and as I was saying, the woman, my mother, got pregnant with me. But that idea did not sit well with my father. He didn't want kids yet, and he knew that deep down she had sabotaged the condom simply to have an excuse to be able to keep him. Only he would not allow this. Of course, when it came to the law, things tend to be tricky. They advocate a lot for the women, and if she wants to keep the baby but the man doesn't, she is not only entitled to keep it, but demand it, that the man pays alimony. And indeed, that's how it was. There were legal battles that even though my father had good lawyers, at the end of the day, my mother was the winner, and he had to pay a considerate amount of money. The worst part of the case is that only a small part of the money would go to me, since the woman would spend it all on clothes, going out with her friends and such, leaving me in the care of my grandmother. This situation worried my father too much, and although he had a son he did not want, at the end of the day, he told himself that he was his offspring, whether he wanted to or not, so he would watch over him. A new legal process then began in which he would be fighting for custody of his son. There was a good side and a bad side. The good side is that he was able to come to agreement that would allow him to not only have visitation, but also for me to be able to spend time with him on the weekends. The bad side is that this process would only begin when I was 5 years of age, and I was barely a newborn by then. It was a hard process, I understand, full of many discussions that could even affect my growth, and it was months of disputes, objections, negotiations. But in the end of the day, my mother decided to make a rather abrupt, cruel, and some may even say inhumane decision. Seeing how it could endanger her source of income, she came up with a plan that would cost her dearly. Taking advantage of her new small fortune that she had saved from my father's monthly payments, she bought a plane ticket to Russia, and without looking back left everything behind and escaped to a new continent. This was a pretty bold thing to do, since the only family she had left was my grandmother. But still, uncles, aunts, cousins, friends, neighbors, she left them all to go somewhere else. Only my dad didn't know this. She went so far as to create a new life and identity just to get to the country in the most clandestine way possible. She would go on the run with me in her arms so that she could escape my father, but not before striking a big blow, threatening him. She changed her name, her phone number, and her residence, and even did everything she could to make my grandmother learn the language. And just like that, she began a evil plan that would change the lives of several people just for wanting to have a few extra luxuries. I still find it hard to believe that I'm talking about the same person who raised me for a lifetime, and so began a whole new life in Mother Russia, with new friends and neighbors making me believe that everything I've experienced so far was a lie. We came here when I was 2, in the middle of negotiations for my father to have custody of me. She kept her contact number, but changed all her personal information so that she could not be traced. What's even more, she paid a lot of money just to camouflage her Russian code, because guess what? My father did not know that we were out of the country. He initiated a search protocol, but nothing ever came of it, and so began years of mysteries and feigned captures, and with my mother having conversations with the father concerned for his son's welfare, unaware that he was even hating him from afar. I think about that and wonder all that could have been different in the situation. I mean, we're talking about school, vacations, activities, family time, and not just with my father, but with the rest of my family. And it was like that for my entire life, or at least some 17 years that I've been in this country. I knew about this story because I confronted my mother, telling her, as a little lie, that I already knew about my father and she had to tell me about it, and surprisingly she did. She admitted her guilt in front of me, but without the slightest hint of remorse. But something 1,000 times worse: plotting. She told me that we have been using that money to have the best and most comfortable life possible for all their lives, and losing that opportunity was simply inconceivable. She told me that she even considered talking to me about it to get my support on the issue. Apparently, my father had been asking my mother for some time to give information about our whereabouts, but she, as always, refused. And so many years passed, and with trust and faith shattered, my father decided to put aside his hope of finally meeting me. In fact, they agreed years ago that when I came of age, I would be told the truth and decide what to do. So, I would immediately be in this situation, or maybe not. At this point, my mother would be capable of anything. I'm writing all of this under a waiting period, as I'm going to consider whether or not to talk to my father. Yeah, I'm nervous about it. I won't lie to you. Oh, and apparently that name Jonathan is my birth name. I mean, how many of us will be able to say in our lifetime that's all been a lie? To the point where even my name isn't my real name. I don't feel like Jonathan's face, but I don't feel like my other name either. I'm a big movie fan, but it's like they say, fact trumps fiction, and I feel like I should make a book out of all this. I just have yet to see what the outcome will be, which I think will be quite turbulent. I hope I can survive the experience and be able to laugh about it in the future. Update number 2. You will not believe where I'm at right now. Well, I'm posting this when I arrived at the airport. I'm just typing on my tablet because I am inside of a plane, heading right to the States. You might say, what? No way, I'm not excited about this. I'll finally meet my dad, as I'll be living with him for a season. It could even be longer. I will develop this story a little. I have a lot of time here up in the sky, so buckle up, as Dad says. I confronted my mother about this and managed to get in touch with my dad on the sly, where I wrote to him rather sheepishly. Come to think of it, I asked him for his name, and indeed it was one that matched the reference I had. I asked him if he had a moment to talk, and he told me that just at that instant he was in the middle of a business meeting. It was the daytime for him, but it's already nighttime for me. So I asked him when we could talk, and I guess he picked up on everything right away, perhaps because of my area code number. He all at once said, "Jonathan?" And, well, the guys and the tears came on their own. "Hey, Dad?" I managed to hear that in the background, and he was saying to the board, "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm going to talk to my son." I tell you, I've never had a warmer feeling in my life, as if something good was finally going to start. But not all good things are free, and in that sense I can say that all the drama ensued with my mother is the reason why I'm writing this now. She didn't want me to be with him at first because it would be sabotaging the plan that she's been working on for 20 years. We argued too much, to the point where even grandmother started to scold me. She was on my mother's side, even though the whole thing was objectively evil. It was taking advantage of a man and playing with his paternal feelings. She deprived him of a son he did not want to have for 17 years, missing out on his childhood and all the traumatizing him as a result. Because that's something I did not tell you about. Because of all this, my father confessed that he had suffered from anxiety attacks, and he began to develop a phobia of commitment and the family model. He came to believe that he could have a stereotypical family for his whole life. And seeing all this happen, well, it was a big mental shock for him. It would not be easy for anybody to go on with their life after such a tragedy. The next thing that happened was something stronger. After the conversation my father and I had, he asked me how I was and what state I was in. I told him I was in Russia. He was surprised, obviously, and apologized, saying that he had stopped sending money because he no longer believed I was alive, or with my mother. Or perhaps, by cutting off our financial supply and support, he could put pressure on us to go out and ask him for help. That was indeed going to happen. He had given up hope, but he told me that listening to me reset his mind and that nothing in the world mattered to him at the moment. Do you know what he said to me? Just remembering it gives me goosebumps to this day. Are you okay? Are you eating well? Do me a favor, pass me a bank account, I'll deposit some money so you can stay in a hotel until I can bring you here. That guy had never seen me in his entire life, and he was already going to go so far to give me money to stay in a hotel, and without even confirming that it was indeed me. I told him later that I could have been a scammer or whatever, but he told me that he understood that that could not happen since he knew it was me. Don't ask me, I'm not a father yet, so I have not unlocked that other innate instinct. Anyways, my mother objected to this, but since I was of age, I could do whatever I wanted, so I decided to fly. I know it was not the best move in the world, but I'm speaking from a much more comfortable position than I was by then. That night, I had a horrible argument with my mom, who yelled at me for revealing all the information and for betraying her trust. I told her she did not deserve my trust in the first place, and that's when she got in my face about everything that she's done for me my whole life, and I told her that first of all, having to bring that up was a very dirty move on her part. Then I told her that she's no better for keeping me captive all my life, depriving me of everything I could have been. For years, I cursed my father, not knowing that he had his day, looking for me. The man spent almost 2 decades thinking about his son and what his son would be doing. Whether he was doing well or badly, if he had learned to drive or shave, if he was going out with girls, or if he was doing his classes. The thought of such prolonged torture, and that the only thing it would be worth it for would be the money? It's diabolical! That's when I told her I was going to leave this house. That day, I went to so-and-so's hotel and got my things, put them into a bag, and left with my mother screaming, crying. We both cried, while my grandmother preferred to lock herself in the room to pray to her God. It was better that she stayed out of it because things would have turned out worse. I left and spent a rather silent night at the hotel, just talking to Dad on the chat, while he confirmed the story I already knew. He was telling me that in the end he was not interested in my mother and that she was an opportunist who took advantage for him for a lifetime. But now that his son was of age, things were going to change. He began to explain to me where he lived, what he did, and what his life was like, and I can't and should not reveal much here. I'll only say that he has money. Lots and lots of money. And he wants me to study at a good university when I arrive because that's part of the story when I was already in a more secure place. We talked about how I could make all the necessary arrangements to return to the US of A. Of course, it would be quite a difficult undertaking since for me, being only 19 years old, it would be an odyssey worthy of a Hollywood movie. What's more, I didn't even have a passport, so I had to go through the whole process. Update number 3. Quickly, last time I cut it short because I was falling asleep on the plane. It's been a while since I've arrived in the US, and I must admit that it's too explosive. I mean, life here is intense, but I'll leave the story of my adaptation to the new environment for another day. As for my dad, well, I met him, and they were very sentimental moments. I mean, you could have, seen a man of almost 50 years old in a suit, elegant, a businessman on his knees crying to see his son for the first time in his damn life at the airport. We could not have cared less about the embarrassment. We've been out and about, but he says he has to take care of my mom's issue first. Even though I told him to leave her alone, I later found out that she was suing him. Dad tells me he didn't want me to find out, so I would not have to go through another rough patch, but I refused to let that go just like that. Now, I'm not only supporting him in the matter, but I will testify on his behalf at trial. She's scheduled for a video call trial as she's charged with multiple counts, ranging from scamming, extortion, to cheating, kidnapping. I don't think she has a very bright future regarding this, but I guess it's the ultimate revenge life gives you after what you've done. If you deprive a man of his child, maybe he has the right to deprive you of your freedom for a while. Yes, as bitter as it sounds, this'll end up being one of those cases where it all ends up as an eye for an eye. Wow, guys, that story was insane, super impactful, and I just want to mention a few of the comments that I was reviewing. A lot of the people were pointing out, yes, the mother was horrible for doing these things, but the saddest part of the entire story was the fact that OP missed out on such time with OP's father. We're talking about early age, 20 years that they can never get back, because ultimately time is the most valuable currency. Guys, I want to know your thoughts about this story. Drop it downstairs in our comment section. This was a wild ride. Maybe somebody's been separated from their mom or dad growing up, and you want to share your story. This is a good place to do it. If you guys are new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day. Inheritance dramas, mother-in-law dramas, stories like you saw today. I mean, we cover it all. Smash that subscribe button. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.